welcome to my talk. I was going to say in my notes, but you're a captive audience, so thanks for not leaving. My talk is called Nail the Pitch and Stick the Landing, How to Propose and Deliver Major Technical Projects. So as Tanya introduced me, my name is Nyung Choi. My pronouns are she and her. And I've been in tech for over 25 years. I think I'm working on my 26th or 27th, ranging in roles from high-level engineering IC to CTO to co-founder to engineering manager to mentor. I most recently served as fractional CTO at Techquitable and as an engineering mentor and advisor at the browser company that makes the Arc browser, if you guys are so inclined, and a senior staff engineer at Slack. I've been lucky enough to be in multiple founding engineering teams, and I've been a part of 5 successful exits, experiencing the rush of getting to product market fit, helping to hypergrow engineering teams, and everything in between. I've helped work on every part of the stack and have shipped in 9 production languages. I'm currently semi-retired, it's great, providing technical advice and guidance to small startups. I have personally mentored and coached over 70 senior plus engineers and engineering leaders in the last 7 years, and I just get a lot of joy from helping engineers with a lot of promise and motivation to achieve their goals. One of the highlights of my time at Slack was being able to start 2 recurring engineering mentorship programs, one of which is still going on. I don't know about the other one. Yeah. But I have also been the tech lead who has proposed projects that have been deprioritized. I've been the senior engineer who fought tooth and nail to advocate for fixing fragile legacy systems and gotten no's over and over again. I've been the engineering manager who pushed to prioritize urgent infrastructure work, but failed to get them approved. But I've also learned from my mistakes and learned how to better pitch my ideas to successfully deliver large infrastructure projects. Whew. I'm a little nervous. So anyway, so let me pause to tell you a story. It's the summer of 2020, the first pandemic summer. I just rolled off leading a major project for my team as staff front-end engineer at Slack. And my manager pulls me in for a chat. And she lets me know that I'll be tech leading another pretty big project, in fact, bigger than the ones I've led before. And I'll be helping to roll out the Slack product to 5 new locales in 3 months. And for people who are not that familiar with internationalization and localization, localization is being able to tailor your product so that it can be used by a native user in a different place, like Italy or Portugal or Korea. And internationalization is the engineering work and the infrastructure that's required to be able to facilitate that. So that can be automated, that can be done in code, that it's not all manual. So at that time, rolling out to 5 new locales would be nearly doubling the number of locales that Slack was available for. And this would be a huge part of the next phase of our globalization plans. So my manager is going through the details, and I'm blanking out a little bit because I'm both really excited because it's a huge opportunity for me, and but at the same time, they said 5 locales in 3 months, and that just sounds like nonsense. So I've been involved in internationalization and localization on and off for since my first internationalization project back in 2000, which was near the beginning of my career. And Korean, which is one of the first of the 5 languages that Slack wanted me to help release, that's actually my first spoken and written language. I was born in South Korea, and that's the language I spoke until I moved to the US when I was 7. So in addition to English, which is my primary language, I also learned some French in high school and Japanese in college. I just love languages, and I had briefly considered studying linguistics when I was in MIT back in the 90s. So all of this made me very excited and gave me the background to understand that localization of a product involved a lot more than just translation. And at Slack, I had already been involved in a couple of large projects, a couple of internationalization adjacent projects as well. And leaders at Slack knew and trusted me to get things done. Like I was known as an execution machine. And I had a lot of teammates who enjoyed working with me. So I knew I was one of the best people in the entire company to tech lead a project like this. And I was lucky that a lot of people put their faith in me. But on the other hand, just like I mentioned, I felt a lot of apprehension. After at that point, over 20 years as an engineer, I knew that if someone else gave me timelines and deadlines that I had not investigated myself, that I just couldn't trust them. And I'm sure many of you have had this experience as well. So, and I know in particular that when you're working with legacy systems, there's a lot of hoops you have to jump through for even small changes potentially. And for bigger changes, there'll be a lot more to do. So, and the Slack product was much bigger and more complicated than the last time they had added new languages, which I think was about 3 or 4 years before that. And the languages that we have been tasked with had unique challenges that needed to be addressed in a systematic way. So I did what a StaffPlus engineer does and just dug through the code, dug through prior work, dug through prior PRDs, TRDs, just talked to the people who were still at the company that had worked on this, and I saw a lot more manual work that we would need to do than appeared on the surface. It looked like a pretty smooth running machine. So I had to get me, one other front end, and one back end engineer to ship all of this in that time that they had given us. And in theory, they said that what we would have to do is we would add some configurations for the new languages. We would get the translations, and then we would look through the product, and we would add tests. We would check various important feature areas, and then we would patch a couple of things that weren't working correctly. It's not true. So the reality was that the configurations weren't straightforward. And as an example, just adding the ability to have a new language, not even all the things you have to configure to make it work. We had to update 4 different repos on 4 different that were owned by 4 different teams that had 4 different approval and release processes. And due to human wait times and having to coordinate with different teams, get approval, just this part took 6 working days to complete. And that's mostly waiting times. The coding part didn't take very long, but it was still time that was taken up, and that's a real thing that you need to add to your schedules. So every type of configuration was manual, whether it was in how we did number formatting, how we did constructed plurals in different languages, possessives, lists, how we showed dates and times. Eva talked earlier about address forms and what kinds of things you need for different locales. All of those were manual configurations. And this is because our internationalization infrastructure predated some of the modern things that we get for free in more updated frameworks. So they had been patched in, and then the next set of work had also been patched in, and so we had this growing pile of patched in code that had a lot of manual overrides. So like I said, 5 new locales, 3 months. But I saw that that was impossible. And something I was pretty good at that point was that I was very good at advocating for the right timelines for the projects. And I had built a lot of trust already. So I, looked through the code. I created an overwhelming avalanche of tickets. I'm not a fan of ticketing everything, but because I needed to advocate for the right timelines for that first language to ship, I ticketed everything. I wrote a ticket for everything, and I could justify why I needed to take 6 weeks for shipping Korean, which is half the timeline that they gave us, right? So at this point, I sat down with my manager, and I was like, hey, look, this is not going to be doable in time. And we talked about deadlines. We talked with the product manager, the go-to-market person. And we sort of reset expectations for how long things will take. But I also said to my manager, we can't just manually patch this. Like, there are things that need to get fixed up. There are things that we could refactor. There are things we can change in the process, stuff we can change in the pipelines, things we can centralize. And even things we can change in or add to the test infrastructure to speed up the work. So this was kind of a rookie error. I didn't get a no, but I didn't get more time to ship Korean, which means that I didn't get time to do the refactor and infrastructure work. I only had time to execute on the tasks. And when I say that this was kind of a rookie mistake, it's that I just talked to my manager. I told her about the problems I had, but I didn't come with a plan. And so at this point in time, we just needed to get it done. and like they didn't really care how I did it. Of course, my manager cares about how we feel about work, but we just needed that first project to be delivered in a 6-week time frame. So what we did, the 3 engineers, is that every single day in the morning we would have a stand-up, and in that stand-up we would strategize about, hey, what things do we have that we can knock down that will actually be refactors or automation that will take the same amount of time as it would to actually manually patch the code. So we weren't increasing the timelines, we were knocking out things that we could do if it didn't take more time than originally planned. So we kept doing that, and if there were, we kept a running list of things that would actually take longer to refactor than to manually do, and we kept a list of how long it should take if we did the refactor and how long we think a refactor would take. So, we were doing that thing where we're forced to cut corners for a release, knowing the code was getting worse, that we were adding to the tech debt. And, it's frustrating as an engineer when you know that if you could just slow down a little bit, you'd be in such a better spot for the next, project. This wasn't a one-and-done project, right? We knew we had 4 more languages coming. So if I could just get things in a better state, then it was going to be better. But instead, we're contributing to things getting slower and more complicated with all of the manual patching we were doing. And as engineers, who care about the product, who care about, outcomes, but who also care about quality, this was really frustrating for all of us. So this is getting into the weeds a little bit, but one part that really got under my skin was adding keyboard support for different languages, keyboard shortcut support. And that means like, in the English keyboard, you might use Control-C, Control-V, you might use Control-Q. There's, what is command, semicolon, whatever, right? You know all these shortcuts, right? But different keyboards, like a simplified Chinese keyboard, like an Italian keyboard, some of these characters are in different places. So if we wanted to support the product having shortcuts, we had to make a lot of customizations for different keyboards. So when I look through the code, there's only 2 small changes to the logic to support any one keyboard. I'm like, this is great, perfect. But I had to actually change 18 files across different functional areas and different teams that were owned by different teams. And so every change took multiple attempts to get it merged, because like I might have a conflict with this team, or this team needs to review it, but they didn't have time. So I sketched out a refactor that would isolate the change to 2 files, but it would have taken a few additional days and coordination with multiple teams that could have added delays, so we noted it down and moved on. Frustrating, right? So have you experienced a project like this where you feel like you're trying to tell your manager or upper management, things are falling apart, things are getting worse, and you have the answer, you know what you should do, but there's not enough time. Like there's product features you have to ship. You try to tell them that the testing infrastructure is fragile, that like you can't, the tests are flaky, that like the reliability is not what it needs to be. But you just can't get anyone to add your project to the schedule, the actual schedule and roadmap, right? So, and sometimes you're lucky. Maybe you can get it on the roadmap, which is great, but it's at the bottom of the roadmap, right? And then like requests come in, and then like things run long, and then it falls to the bottom, and then it doesn't happen, right? So raise your hand if you've run into this problem in your career. Of course, right? Because we're all StaffPlus. Raise your hand if your company or team or project later ran into issues because they didn't fix what you thought needed fixing early enough. I know, it feels terrible, right? Yeah. So when this happened, you know about Cassandra from the Greek mythology, where like you're trying to tell people the thing that you can see the future, but they won't take you seriously. They won't listen to you. And but on the flip side, I would like you to raise your hand if you've already cracked a nut on how to get people to listen to you and give you time to actually make effective technical changes. Okay, we'll have to talk. Give me tips, right? And if you raise your hand, you can go to lunch. You don't need to be here. Yeah. So why can't everyone else see how important it is, right? Like, so many people I've talked to have said this phrase, like, why can't they see it? So you can't actually control how other people are going to see a problem or feel about a problem. And the only part that you have control over is how you talk to them about the problem. And you got to talk to them in a way that's going to maximize your chances of getting your project approved. You can't approve your own project, but you got to do everything you can. And to be really blunt, you have to improve your communication skills. So here's my advice to you, born from years of both unsuccessfully and successfully pitching projects to my teams. All right, make it easy and safe for the decision maker to say yes. Wow, we're done, right? Like, we're not done. So where are you going wrong? Where did I go wrong? Most of the engineers I talk to tend to make the same common mistakes. So some of the common mistakes are, you're centering the wrong person in your pitch. That person is often yourself, your teammates, or your team as a whole. You're talking about like the pain to your team and to yourself and like the time it takes, instead of the decision maker. You're trying to convince other people to adopt your priorities instead of connecting this work to the existing priorities you know that they have. You're not clearly showing the cost benefit. Sometimes you're talking about the cost, which is the problem. Sometimes you're talking about how much work you might have to put in, but you don't have a detailed breakdown on how much time would be saved, how many new projects you could handle. You just kind of talk it out with your manager, right? So, and I didn't have that breakdown of the lowest hanging fruit or the best bang for the buck when I talked to my manager. I just came to her with a problem, not a plan. And you're not addressing their worst fears. This part is actually more important than you might think. There's fears that your manager, your director, they have in the back of their heads that they're worried about. And if you don't face it and confront it, you're not going to get a yes. And you don't have a clear execution plan with escape hatches. Escape hatches are really important. You need to let them know how the order that you're going to phase this work in, how you will bail on the plan if it doesn't work, how you can cut it short. So how do we avoid these common mistakes? I have a couple of answers that questions you can answer for yourself. So who can say yes or no to this project? A lot of people can say no to the project. A lot of stakeholders can say no. But usually only one or two people can really say yes to the project. Think about them, right? So my manager could say no, but she couldn't actually necessarily say yes. It was probably my skip level, which is the VP of engineering. So what is that person's highest priority right now? And what goals are they held accountable for? So they have outcomes that they need to answer for, right? And you need to sort of think about, how does your work that you are proposing connect to their priorities? And what is their biggest nightmare? What keeps them up at night? Is it closing the company? Is it revenue? Is it retention? So if you don't have the right answers to these critical questions, then you're most likely going to get a no. And you're going to feel stuck, and you're going to feel misunderstood. But you are not doing the work of communicating, understanding the context and communicating. I think Audrey has talked about how you need to know your audience. You need to read the room and talk to the right people in the right room. You have to not think, I'm talking to just another engineer. So let's talk about who first. This is a person, so in the case that I talked about with my manager actually probably wanted to say yes, right? But because I didn't come with a plan for her, she would have struggled to make a real case to the director or the VP above her that this was worth putting in a time in the schedule to talk to our go-to-market partners and say, hey, we got to push this out another 2 weeks, another 3 weeks. So if we give that poor pitch to our even manager who could say no, then we'll never get to the person who can say yes. So once you figure out who that person is, you have to reframe your problem and solution from that person's perspective. And so how do you do that? So the interesting thing is that my VP had actually stated at the beginning of the quarter that our department needed to roll out, they stated a lot of things, a lot of goals for the entire organization, but that my department had to be responsible for rolling out to 25 more locales in 2 years. So I had a directly relevant priority that they were responsible for, that they would answer for, that their business metrics would rely on. And I could see that connection, right? So the hard part is that when they state their priorities, my job isn't to try to change their mind. It isn't to say, hey, productivity engineering is important, infrastructure work is important, reliability is important. Like, they know all that, right? But they have set that priority for a reason. They have pressures on them. They've talked to the board, whatever it is, right? So if that's the priority, you better make sure that you are not trying to change their mind, right? Find the connection. So if your project really doesn't fit with their priorities, you might actually, this might not be the right project. So for instance, if their priority is increasing, uptime, you might be talking to them about a project where you automate admin tools, right? And you're like, what's the connection there? There's no connection. So for that, you might table it for a different quarter when that becomes a priority. So you have to figure out, how does your project fit the highest needs and priorities? You have to clearly and easily show how it fits bottom line departmental and company goals. And if you have numbers you can point to them. If your team priorities are increasing ARR, does your problem and solution actually impact ARR? If it does, make that very clear in your problem statement. If it doesn't, don't try to make a tenuous link that doesn't exist, right? That's not doing anyone any favors. So let's see. You also need to address what keeps them up at night. So as their stated goals might be, ARR, but really their fear is that they have to shut down the company. It might be that the whole team might get cut. It might be that they are on a performance review that you don't know about. So there are fears that they have about things that they need to deliver. And so you have to think about, does my project help solve their problem? Does it help introduce more fear, or does it help introduce more safety to the thing that they fear at night, to having to shut down the company, for instance, right? So here's one kind of nightmare for engineering leaders. I'd like you to raise your hand if you've ever worked on a project that involved a refactor or rearchitecture, and it was initially scoped for, let's say, like nothing small, so at least 2 engineering months, right? Okay, cool, right? Many of you. Keep your hand up if it took at least 50% longer to ship. Yeah, okay, keep your hand up if it took at least 100% longer to ship. And keep your hand up or raise your hand if everyone in the project got sick of the project before it got across the finish line. There you go, right? So that's one nightmare. Like anytime you propose any of these projects, that's what they're thinking in the back of their head. So, and this one's pretty relevant in these tough times. Raise your hand if you've ever had a team or project or even your whole company shut down because you could not get to a sustainable revenue model, you couldn't sign the contract, you couldn't get users quickly enough. Many of you, right? Or some of you. And it's tough. So when you think about what fears and nightmares your leadership has, think about these 2 scenarios above. On one side, you have this never-ending project that has delivered some minimal benefit that you just don't know when it's going to end. And on the other side, you have this fear that you'll have to shut down your team because you couldn't do the work that was actually critical to the success of the team. So let's review. We answered these questions. Who can say yes or no to this project? What is that person's highest priority? What's their biggest nightmare? So having answered all these questions, how do we make it easy and safe for the decision maker to say yes? We give them a really solid pitch. What components are required for that pitch? So we need a problem statement, and we covered how we're going to get that problem statement, right? We need a cost-benefit analysis. We need a list of risks and a set of risk mitigation strategies. You need a plan A and plan B. You need a list of open issues. This is not obvious to people usually. So the problem statement should be concise and easy to understand. It looks like I'm running out of time. So. And it should be really relevant to the problems that your department is tackling. So, instead of talking to my manager about how long a certain thing took, I needed to talk to them about the problem of 25 locales in 2 years. We were only going to do, by my estimation, something like between 12 to 16 locales in 2 years. We were not going to meet the goals. So I needed to communicate the cost to them in terms of what they value. So how much will it cost to leave the project, leave the problem as it is, or let it grow? Because not doing it also has a cost, right? And how much will it cost you to let you take on the project? So, the cost is what I stated in the problem, right? Which is that they won't be able to launch 25 new locales. We will miss those business goals. The cost of letting my team take on that project would be 6 weeks spread out through 3 launches spanning a total of 20 weeks. So it would be spread out in a 20-week period, but it would take 6 extra weeks. So the ideal cost-benefit analysis also has a low-level breakdown for each independent area of your pitch. So I think what should I do about the time? I have like 10 more slides. I have 7 more slides. I don't know. Oh, just keep going? All right. So let's move on. So the low-level breakout is really important as well because the details matter in getting an actual plan approved. So this is an example, current cost of turning on a new locale with no customization, half a day of developer time plus 5 days for sign-off and release, 4 repos touched. Cost of refactor is 1 developer day, 7 days to get sign-off from other teams and release, 4 repos touched. New cost of turning on a locale is 1 hour of developer time and a nominal release overhead because it's our repo, 1 repo touched. Net reduction in time is 90% reduction in turnaround time. Another example, adding keyboard support was taking about 3 to 4 days. Adding another 3 days, I was able to get it down to 1 to 2 days, and the net reduction time was around 50% in turnaround time. So I had that kind of breakdown for like 20-some different areas of code. And so you could see how much time it would take and how much benefit you would get. So we could just order them in order of like best bang for the buck. Risk and risk mitigation is really about addressing the nightmares that your bosses have. What can go wrong? Can you roll it back? Is it going to bring the product down? Is it going to cause scaling issues? Is it going to go on forever? What if this breaks, what if it breaks certain features that will cause people to not sign on their contracts? So you actually need to have an answer for all of these nightmare scenarios and very specific technical risk scenarios that your product has, and be able to have a plan to address them. Like, you need that in your plan. They're not going to approve it without it. And open issues, there are always in big projects unanswered questions, and there's a lot of moving dependencies. There might be other releases that depend on your release. There might be other things that go out in that time. What you need is to have a plan on who you will talk to and how and when you will resolve that issue. If you don't have this section, a lot of questions will get asked during the review of your pitch, and like, it's kind of unnecessary. You know that those are already existing issues. So I'm just going to go real fast through this. Your execution plan should really involve a lot of communication. You got to tell people before they ask you. You got to have kickoff, status report, mid-project check-ins. Your responsibility as StaffPlus is not someone that's just writing code. You got to keep everyone feeling safe about this project. You got to prioritize the biggest bang for the buck first. You got to release incrementally with immediate benefits in each release. Do not plan a 6-month-long release where nothing goes out until you are done at 6 months, because that's going to take 2 years. Be ready to stop the project at any point. So if you are incrementally shipping, you can stop the project 4 weeks in and still have done a lot of good. You could go 2/3 in and have done a lot of good. Be ready to stop. And aggressively cut scope at every stage. And that one could be a whole talk in and of itself, because that is a real skill that as StaffPlus leaders, you really need to develop. Here's my LinkedIn. You can have a 30-minute conversation with me, and you can get the deck. Yeah, thank you. Sorry.